By the evening, the rain had stopped. The muggy atmosphere, however, continued. Somewhat knocked back by Miss Beveridge's brutal rejection, I clambered into the Bentley and drove up to town in search of oblivion. Soho thrummed like a wire across a drum, reeking of camphor from summer clothes, with the sizzle of neon cafe signs and the scents of expectation, tobacco, coffee, sweat, sex. In Dean Street I drove past narrow entranceways as quaint as Eastbourne beach huts. In most, below stuttering red lamps, hovered ghostly whores. As I went by, the girls drifted in and out like figures on a weather house, and fugitive memories sprang up unbidden. How gaily I had trawled these same streets as a young man, a raffish De Quincey, my scarlet-lined opera cloak shielding each of my couplings as completely as the veil of the night itself. Halting at a zebra crossing, I glanced over my shoulder, and the image thrown back in a tobacconist's window, an old man hunched over a steering wheel, banished all such nostalgia. I shook my head. Throwing the car briskly into first, I dodged the traffic of Oxford Street and headed for the fabled Blood Orange. 3 stories tall, the club staggered between a pair of more respectable buildings like a drunk between 2 coppers. In its 20s heyday, it had been the epitome of glamour. Now, in its dotage, it had a seedy appeal all of its own. I parked the car in a cobbled mews that stank of last night's relief, then went up worn steps into a kind of vestibule. A tiny asthmatic lift took me up 2 floors and decanted me into a big, dark room, every available surface covered with shards of broken mirror, grotesquely reflecting the heaving mass of jabbering, laughing faces. Incongruously, a Boy Scout, I couldn't seem to get away from them at present, was wandering from table to table with a collecting tin. I headed for the curved bar, where a big man with a neck like a block of ice cream was forcing flat champagne onto a sad-eyed girl in her mother's furs, whilst 2 skinny queens in evening dress hooted at each other, their wolfish features shattered, split, and reflected in the mirrored walls. I knew them all, loved and loathed the pack of them. Such was the Blood Orange. However, at one of the tables sat a stranger, an insignificant-looking bald man with little puffs of white hair sprouting from behind each ear. His white silk scarf had twisted up the points of his collar to give him an incongruously Pickwickian air. Leaning like a question mark against the wall right by him was a young black man. Toreador slim in skinny suit and tie, his glossy black hair was cut in a ruler-straight fringe, and acid-green socks showed over his winkle-pickers. He watched the Pickwickian from under sleepy eyelids. Dismissing them both from my mind, I walked up to the bar where stood, presiding over this whole carnival of damnation, a colossal female in canary yellow. Just then she was knocking back a pint of dog's nose and pulling a flap of skirt out of the cheeks of her buttocks. My dear servant Delilah was now as old as the hills and as white-haired as I, but age had not withered her, and when fortune had finally come my way, I had granted her freedom from domestic service. With her savings she had bought the leasehold on the crumbling Blood Orange, and the rest, as they say, is hysteria.
"Mr. Box!"
she cackled when she saw me approach.
"Oh, what a sight for Sorens! Get set down, I'll fetch you some plonk."
So, how's business?" I inquired.
"Oh, same as ever,"
she growled, sloshing cognac into a none-too-clean tumbler.
"I got to read the Riot Act 3 times a week just to keep the buggers in order. Mind you, some might say as we've gone up in the world."
She nodded towards the fluffy-haired Pickwick-like fellow I noticed earlier. The handsome youth was now sitting with him, and they seemed to be having a fairly lively conversation. The older man was looking nervously about and nibbling at his fingernails.
"You know who that is?"
asked Delilah.
"The old geezer."
"I feel I should," I admitted, "but I'm not as good with faces as once I was."
"Sir Vivian Hoopla,"
breathed Delilah.
"Remember him?"
"Oh, yes, of course. Used to be Secretary of State. No, he was head of the Board of Health. Wasn't he under Asquith? Delilah shrugged hugely.
I just remember him from the picture papers. Nearly got the top job, didn't he?
I nodded, intrigued. Yes, he did. And indeed it was Hoopla. Pinched and mean-spirited by reputation, he was a pillar supporting wall and front porch of the establishment. And yet there he was, sat at one of Delilah's chipped tables, apparently in search of oblivion, like me.
"What you been up to, sir?"
asked Delilah, a mischievous twinkle in her bloodshot orbits.
"Hoping some kiddies across the road? Opening a new hospital ward? Or have you been going down to the park to chuck Aυɗisc at the ducks?"
Now, Delilah," I said, sipping gingerly at the brandy, "you're sounding petulant again."
"Well," she drawled, "not like the old days, is it? Stuck behind a desk fiddling with paper clips. I bet you give a year of your life just for a nice juicy assassination."
I shook my head. "Time to bring down the curtain, Delilah," I said. "The party's over." But scarcely had the words left my lips when I felt a sudden heat on my cheek, and my smeary glass exploded as a 9mm bullet slammed into the bar. I flung myself to the floorboards. In a ring of suddenly empty tables stood Sir Vivian Hoopla, brandishing a luger. His ruddy face was suffused with a wicked grin, and the clouds of hair behind his ears seemed to stand on end. He fired again, further fracturing the mirrored walls. The slender young man shielded his head with his long, slim fingers.
"Look out! Look out!"
cackled Sir Vivian delightedly, loosing off another shot.
"Never fired a weapon before, you see. Sat out the war of my silly old rump. Both wars, in point of fact. But now, now I'll take on the lot of you."
"All right, mate,"
growled Delilah, rolling up her sleeves and approaching stealthily.
"Time you turned in."
"Not likely,"
yelled Hoopla, and galloped off through the crowd to the lift. He dragged back the grill and turned to face the room, a manic glitter in his eyes.
See, he piped. "I'm a match for you all."
The luger spat fire into the smoky air, and the great central chandelier splintered, showering crystal droplets like frozen tears. Then the lift chugged into life, and Hoopla was gone. "Stairs!" I cried, scrambling to my feet. "Get to the stairs!" Delilah and I tore from the room and clattered down 2 flights, flung open the front door and dashed outside, only to be greeted by the roar of an engine and a great screech of tires. I gaped at Delilah. "He's stolen my ruddy car!" Delilah heaved a huge sigh, shoulders sagging in defeat.
"Come on, then. I'll call the Rosses."
I looked round swiftly, and my heart leapt as I caught sight of a moped parked opposite. "Forget the Rosses," I cried. "You said you wanted to recapture the halcyon days, you old fossil. Come on!" We dashed across to the moped, our hips clicking like knitting needles. A groan of effort, and I swung my leg across the broad back of the machine. Delilah did likewise behind me, and the poor vehicle sagged under the weight. I chugged the engine into life, and belching fumes, we screeched off into the traffic in pursuit of my Bentley. I peered ahead at the silvery car bumpers as we shot across Oxford Street and back into Soho. "What the hell can have got into the old fool?" I yelled.
"Maybe he's cracked," cried
Delilah.
"Pressure of work."
I shook my head. No, he's been retired for years. In any case, I'm sure of— "Look out!" Ahead, manoeuvring through the traffic with terrifying disregard, was the Bentley.
"What was you going to say?"
cried Delilah. I crouched low over the handlebars. "Tell you later." There was a fanfare of protesting horns as Hoopla smashed into Berwick Street. A mass of gabardine punters fled as the car screamed past them. Then suddenly, dozens of covered market stalls blocked his way. Hoopla slammed on the Bentley's brakes. I could see the top of his bald head shining in the electric light as he considered his next move. Suddenly he revved the engine, and the car leapfrogged forward, ploughing into the stalls and sending shattered planks, fruit and vegetables spuming into the air. There was a sickening crunch as Hoopla sliced my beloved Bentley through the last of the stalls and, in a plume of exhaust smoke, zigzagged towards Shaftesbury Avenue. "Hoopla!" I cried desperately. "Sir Vivian, get out of the car before you kill someone!"
"I must get on,"
whooped Hoopla.
"No time to lose. Can't you see? Can't you see what happened? It's a bloody miracle."
Suddenly a stretch of clear road opened, leading with dreadful inevitability to Piccadilly Circus and the statue of Eros. Hoopla took immediate advantage and opened up the Bentley's throttle, steering the car down the very centre of the carriageway. Then he attempted a right turn, and suddenly the car was on two wheels, smacking onto the pavement and heading for the famous statue. In a blur, the motor flipped over and slammed sidelong into Eros with a devastating percussion. Hoopla was hurled through the windscreen onto the steps beneath the statue. As though in sympathy, Eros sagged as the masonry crumbled beneath him, arrow now aimed downwards as if to pierce the old man's heart. I screeched the moped to a halt, and Delilah and I stumbled unsteadily towards the scene of the accident. A thin trickle of blood was dribbling from Hoopla's lips onto the starched ends of his wing collar. I bent down and wiped the blood from his face. "Sir Vivian," I whispered urgently, "for God's sake, what happened to you?"
"Wonderful," he murmured. "Wonderful."
Then the old fellow began to chuckle gently, and, struggling to get his breath, whispered,
"Le papillon noir."
"What?" But Hoopla's eyes had closed. A broad smile spread over his blood-soaked face, and he was gone. Delilah shook her massive head.
"Bloody odd. I've never seen anyone act like that before."
With an effort, I straightened up. "I have," I said. From close by I heard the wail of a police siren and looked round. To my surprise, in amongst the ogling crowd was the young man from the Blood Orange. Girl slim, fingers bright with rings, he gazed at me from behind the geometrically straight fall of his black hair. Then he was gone, melting into the crowd. Travel, though it broadens the mind, narrows life expectancy. The positive benefits of each lovely foreign vista, every restful sail down the Blue Nile, are offset by the hateful tyranny of actually getting there. The cramped train, the soulless airport, the dreadful people, and perhaps worst of all, carrying one's own luggage. Whatever became of bearers? Athens airport wore the familiar bleary look of an early hour's arrival, stale with sweat and tobacco. A handful of uniformed officials shuffled about the shoddy buildings, staring sullenly at us newcomers. I was keeping the black youth in sight. He was some way behind me, head buried in a well-thumbed paperback. He'd leapt into a cab at Piccadilly, which I'd followed on my borrowed moped all the way to London Airport, and from there to Athens. Outside the Greek terminal, the air was sharp, the darkening sky cobalt as a ceramic tile and crammed with stars. I lit a cigarette, hailed a cab, and then sat in the back, ignoring the jabbering driver as I waited for the mysterious youth to emerge. At last he did so, shouldering his bag and getting into a cab of his own. We followed him through cramped, dingy streets overhung with sagging cables like stitches on burst wounds, until he reached the dimly lit railway station. A big, elderly-looking train was already at the platform, huffing as though impatient. I checked the departures board. The train was heading for Istanbul. In 5 minutes. The slender youth swung open a door, took a swift look around, and then disappeared inside the train. I paid off my driver and walked quickly to the telegraph office. I knew of someone in Istanbul who might prove very useful. With moments to spare, I pulled myself up onto the train, feeling a little thrill of anticipation as I settled down into a private cabin. The engine lurched, the giant wheels squealed, and the journey east began. I lay back on my cool white pillow and let my buzzing thoughts settle into some kind of order. As I had remarked to Delilah, the crazed behaviour of Sir Vivian Hoopla was not entirely unfamiliar to me. Bells had rung. Distant ones, but they'd rung all the same. Just 12 months ago, Sir Douglas Go-Between, another former cabinet minister, had broken his neck after falling out of an apple tree. When questioned about his behaviour, his grieving wife could only say that he'd woken up that morning determined to go scrumping. Then there'd been Baroness Watchbell, the elderly pharmacist who, not long after Go-Between's demise, had strapped herself to the wing of a Cessna bobcat and collided with a mountain. Then there was Père Medlar, the French cleric, whose work on the immune system had brought him the Nobel Prize. Happily celibate for years, he had suddenly, at the age of 80, taken himself off to Marrakesh and died in a fit of sexual excess involving 38 boys and a Barbary macaque. The question was, had these silly old buffers just got it into their heads to have one last hurrah before the graveyard, or were their deaths connected? And was Christopher Miracle's so-called suicide part of the same bizarre pattern? Then there were Houpla's dying words. Le papillon noir, the black butterfly. A strange picture was forming, made all the more strange by the presence, both at Houpla's table and the scene of the accident, of the mysterious young man. It wasn't much of a lead, but it was all I had. Next morning, I breakfasted in the dining car. I was just reaching for my second coffee when suddenly I became aware of another presence in the otherwise empty carriage. He was standing by the door, willowy tall in a cut-throat crease suit, black roll-neck sweater and sunglasses, over which hung his dead-straight hair. "This seat taken?" he fluted. The accent was curious, faintly American. I shook my head. Without a word, my quarry slipped into the empty place, and I felt his warm leg brush my knee. Then he smiled, showing perfect white teeth. "Cigarette?" he asked. Thank you, no," I said, patting my side. "I have my own." "Oh, no, baby. I meant, do you have a cigarette? For me?" "Oh," I cried. "Oh, of course." Fumbling in my jacket, I produced my battered old silver case. He took out a Turkish mixture and held it between his long, slim fingers. I proffered my lighter, then lit a cigarette for myself, and fixed the youth with a hard stare. "Well, this is a pleasant surprise, Mr.—" He chuckled, and the sound was curiously pretty, like the song of a bird. "Names are very powerful things, baby. If you knew who I was, you might go telling tales out of school." "Why ever would I do that?" I smiled. "However, I have no qualms about introducing myself. My name is—" "Oh, I know who you are," he murmured, sliding the sunglasses down the bridge of his nose, eyes glittering like Whitby jet beneath the sculpted hoods of their lids. "I know all about you, Mr. Lucifer Box. You were good." "Was I?" "You might even have been the very best, but there comes a time when you should retire from the field with some grace. Just wouldn't be right for you to end it all out here. Time's up. Tick-tock, baby. Tick-tock." I folded my arms. "How kind of you to be concerned for my welfare and for elucidating matters." "Huh?" "Well, I wasn't sure whether I was on a wild goose chase. Now I know I'm not." He threw back his head and giggled, slapping a long brown hand against his chest. "Good point. Whoops." I felt a sudden warmth on my leg and realized with an electric thrill that he had slipped off his shoe and lain his bare foot against the flesh of my ankle. "But seriously, baby," he cooed, "why don't you get off the train at the next station? Beautiful country around here. You could see the sights. Take it easy." His foot was moving slowly, lazily, up my calf, over my knee. "Easy," he breathed. "Nice and easy. This isn't work for old men." In an instant, my hand dived under the table and grabbed his ankle. With the other, I took hold of his big toe and bent it back savagely. He gasped in shock and pain and dropped his cigarette. "Just who are you?" I demanded. He twisted in his seat, and I jerked his toe back still further. "Name," I insisted. "Kingdom," he croaked at last. "Kingdom come." I let his foot go at once, and he pulled it back like a whip.
"Damn you!" he cried. "No call for that."
I picked up my coffee and swirled it around the cup. "So, Kingdom, I may call you Kingdom, mayn't I? It seems you know all about me, but I know next to nothing about you. That strikes me as a very unfair arrangement."
"Life's unfair, baby,"
he snarled, massaging his bruised toe. I fixed him with a level stare, blue eyes to brown. "Really? How's yours been? And how does Sir Vivian Hoopla fit into it? You two were having a very animated chat last night in the Blood Orange." In a flash there was a long, thin, deadly blade at my throat.
"I could slit you open like a blowfish, baby,"
Kingdom Come said with deadly gravity.
"No one touches me, not without my say-so."
I swallowed and grinned foolishly. I have terrible manners. I always forget to ask nicely when I'm torturing people. The boy's face suddenly relaxed and he giggled again. The knife vanished up the expensively cut sleeve as suddenly as it had appeared.
"Well, let's call this a warning," he said lightly. "A nice, friendly warning, Mr. Lucifer Box."
He rose like a wisp of smoke and gave me a graceful bow as he headed for the door.
"It's been an honor, sir, I mean that. But I do hope we shan't meet again. Next time I might not be so friendly."
That evening, Istanbul announced itself with the achingly mournful call to prayer. I left the train and looked around for Kingdom Come. There was, of course, no sign. I could only hope that, if my contact in the city were half as good as his reputation promised, I would soon be back on the boy's trail. There was a reply waiting for me at the telegraph office, welcoming me to the city and giving the address of an hotel into which my contact had booked me. It was one of those cosy places constructed in the old colonial style. A beaming concierge in a comical fez showed me to my room, where I bathed luxuriously and surrendered my suit to be laundered. Then I stretched out for a welcome 40 winks before my evening appointment. The night was very warm. Little blocks of charcoal burned brightly in swinging lamps outside shut-up shops. Clothes freshly laundered, I made my way up a stone stair and found myself on a raised concrete platform on which sprouted half a dozen cafes. I walked on until I came to the third cafe, parted a thin muslin curtain, and went inside. A great rolling fug of tobacco smoke billowed overhead. I sat down at a hexagonal table and ordered a glass of coffee and honey and nut sweetmeats. Both were utterly delicious, the coffee glutinous. Lighting a cigarette, I leaned back against the brickwork and let the scene wash over me. Lord, I'd missed Istanbul. I hadn't been there since the early days of the Franco-British occupation, when I'd been tracking down the spy known only as Rosehip, the best belly dancer in old Istanbul, who dusted her nipples with icing sugar in imitation of the snow-covered domes of the Topkapi. Happy days. Glancing at my wristwatch, I turned as the muslin curtain parted, and a huge man pushed his way inside. He plonked himself down at the table next to mine and barked at the boy to fetch him a pipe. He was like a bear in white linen, the swarthy face bisected by a drooping black moustache. 2 gold rings sparkled in one ear. I noticed that the tip of the ear was ragged, as though it had been bitten off. He glanced towards me, and I saw that, though one eye gleamed darkly, the other was missing, replaced by a gold sovereign that had been screwed into the socket. It blazed briefly in the light, leaving the after-image of dear dead George V on my startled retina. At length he withdrew the mouthpiece of the water pipe and swivelled in my direction.
"I like your shows, Pat."
"Thanks. I prefer brogues," I replied.
"But only from churches."
The silly code words exchanged, he moved sideways over the cushions and gripped my hand with his massive paw.
All right, Hinny,
he grinned.
You must be Lucifer Box. I've heard a lot about you, like.
Whitley Bay? I ventured.
None other,
he cackled.
Do you fancy a drink?
Bay was an old contact of Delilah's, and though we'd never actually met, his reputation preceded him. Whilst maintaining a respectable public facade as a university professor, he was the secret leader of a cadre of psychoanalysts come mercenaries known as the Young Turks. Their speciality lay in imagining themselves into the minds of the enemy, and then working out, through analysis, what their next move would be. If this failed, they fell back on good old-fashioned Balkan brutality. It was a potent combination, and the Young Turks were feared and respected as a result.
So,
said Bay,
how can I help?
I quickly told him about the queer deaths of the elderly dignitaries, Hoopla's accident, and Kingdom Come's threats on the train. Oh, there's one more thing. Hoopla said something as he was dying. Le papillon noir. Mean anything to you? Bay's one good eye widened, stretching the dark skin around the sovereign.
You interest me, Mr. Box,
he said at last.
You interest me very much.
I drank some wine. How so?
Stuff floods through this place,
said Whitley Bay, folding his trunk-like arms.
It's a gateway to the west, just like it's always been. Once it was spice, then heroin from Afghan poppies.
And now?
We've been picking up whispers, he said. Not much.
A drug? Whitley Bay nodded.
Black butterfly. It's a new one on me, like.
Me too, I said. So what does it do? Do you know? Whitley shrugged.
That's what I hope we'll find out. Tomorrow, at the Hagia Sophia. We've got a contact on the inside.
The inside of the mosque?
The inside of the organisation. We reckon the pills are made up in a part of the city called БΥттєяf噚. It's north of the Golden Horn. Nice area. Dead posh back in the day. Our contact has only given us a few hints, but me lads and I have pieced it together, and we reckon that's the base of their operations.
He stretched and broke wind explosively.
Anyway, he said, you must be knackered. I'll call for you at 9, though them buggers in the minarets will have you up well before that.